In this market update, I talk about why beta and alpha is important and why it's more important to look at when measuring someone's effectiveness as a portfolio manager and not for individual securities. Hi, Jim Gore from THOR Wealth Management. Today I'm going to talk about a concept called modern portfolio theory and when it is appropriate to use it and when it is not. First of all, modern portfolio theory is a theory about looking at risk and return in your portfolio. What it's looking at here are two aspects. One is beta, basically your correlation versus the market. Are you more risky, more volatility than the market, or less volatility than the market? The second thing is alpha. So based on your level of risk, are you getting a good return or not? So in other words, if you're taking less risk than the market or you have less volatility, you should expect a lower rate of return. If you have higher volatility, you should expect a much higher rate of return than the market. And that's really reflected here. And on this chart, we're looking at two portfolios on a risk-adjusted basis. So we're looking on the left axis is we're looking at the returns. On the bottom axis is beta, how correlated you are. So one means that you are fully correlated with the market. And you can see here the beta of the market in this example is 1, the return is 8%. Portfolio A has a beta of 0.7. So what this is saying is the portfolio has 30% less volatility. It is only 70% correlated with the market. So when the market goes up 1%, typically it's up 0.7. When the market goes down 1%, it's only down 0.7%. So there's a lot less volatility in this portfolio. And even though this index has underperformed the market, so it's up 7%, the alpha, which is the risk-adjusted rate of return, based on the volatility, what return should you expect? And that's what the line here is showing you, is that you should expect about a 5% rate of return if you're taking 30% less volatility. The return here is 7%, so the alpha is a positive 2% annually. So based on the level of risk, this active manager is doing a much better job in the portfolio. Portfolio B, on the other hand, is a different story. Portfolio B is looking at a beta of 1.2, so this is 20% more volatility. And this is very important for an investor. Do you want to have more volatility in your portfolio? If I'm taking more volatility in the portfolio, I should be expecting a higher rate of return. So on here, you can see that the return is 1% higher than the market, but the volatility is 20% higher. So you should be expecting a return of 10% based on your volatility. You're getting 9%, and your alpha is a negative 1%. So based on this chart here, Portfolio A is doing a much better job on a risk-adjusted basis than Portfolio B. Even though it's underperformed from a return standpoint, risk is important. And this is a very good way to analyze how your portfolio manager is doing, and if you're getting if the manager is doing a good job in lowering your risk, or is he taking excessive risk and not getting the returns to justify it. The problem is with modern portfolio theory is it is sometimes backward looking, and you don't want to necessarily invest in a security or an investment based on past performance. And I learned this very early on. When I got in the business back in 1986, I remember in 1988 using modern portfolio theory to get investors, big investors, endowments and foundations, into international securities. This is when Japan had a huge run-up in portfolio. I remember saying, hey, you want to invest with international securities because it lowers your risk and increases your return. What happened over the next 3 years is having that international exposure actually hurt us because it had negative performance versus the rest of the market. So you have to look at it forward-looking, and you can't look at it on a specific security basis. And let me give you an example of that. And this is a pretty good example, and this is looking at the stock market versus the bond market. And what I'm looking at here is the returns from about September of 2007 through December of 2008 of the S&P 500 versus the 20-year Treasury Bond ETF, TLT. And you can see the top section here is looking at performance. The performance for the bond market, or TLT, was up 23%. The stock market was down 44%. But more importantly, you look at the correlation on the bottom, and this is looking at the correlation on 10-day returns. And you can see that this has been negatively correlated. So in other words, it moved opposite of what the market did. Well, that shows up in the performance. It was much better return, and it actually gave you true diversification in your portfolio when the market went down in 2008. And that was a very rough time for the market. People were rushing to treasury bills. However, if you just look at that performance here, you would have invested in treasury bills, long-term treasury bills, back in 2022. Well, look what happened here. Actually, the 20-year treasury bill actually underperformed the stock market, the S&P, pretty significantly. And notice the correlation is not negative anymore. It's actually positive 0.4%. So it's more correlated in the movements with the stock market in 2022, whereas in 2008, it was negatively correlated. And this is why you should never use beta for analyzing individual securities, whether it's ETFs or stocks, individual stocks, because the correlation does change at certain times. And this is not a good way to say, hey, I'm lowering my risk in the portfolio, because if you did that in 2022, you can see actually you increase your risk with TLT at that time, and you had worse performance by putting that into your portfolio. If you have any questions or concerns, as always, reach out to us here at THOR Wealth Management or give us a call. Take care, and I'll talk to you sometime in December.